hello there. It's me again, casual, unedited Rebecca. You guys seem to enjoy last week's book review of Knock at the Cabin Door, Cabin at the End of the World. So, except for that one guy who was like very angry. I assume that that was the author using a pseudonym to be like, screw you for not enjoying this book. Why don't you write a book? You're not allowed to not like books. You have to write your own book now. That's what happens. If you don't like a piece of media, legally you have to go make your own book, movie, symphony, whatever. I don't make the rules. That commenter does. Anyway, so I'm once again going to talk about the book I read after that, which was Neuromancer by one William Gibson, a mind bender of a read. So says the Village Voice. And much like the previous one, I'll do spoiler free at first. And then I don't even know if we're going to get into spoilers, but I'll give you a warning before I do, if I do. First, though, a story. I was back in 2001-ish. I was living in Seattle working at Restoration Hardware when a man came in and bought something and handed me his credit card. And I looked at the credit card and it said William Gibson. And I said, "Oh, William Gibson, the writer?" And he said, "No, but I get that a lot." And I said, "Really?" And then he gave me a look that was like, "Yeah." And I was like, I just didn't think he was that popular. And then he shrugged and, we went our separate ways. And then afterwards I thought, what if that actually was William Gibson, the writer, and he just was being humble and didn't want to get into it with a fan, and then I insulted him. And I've wondered that for many years until maybe now 8 years ago. I was dating a guy who had William Gibson on his podcast, and he told him that story. And because William Gibson did live near, I think he was living in Vancouver, or he was in the Pacific Northwest at the time. And William Gibson said he did not recall ever even going into a Restoration Hardware. So it probably wasn't him. So I was relieved, though, to have that solved. I probably did not actually insult William Gibson. I only knew of him back then because I had tried to read Neuromancer and could not get into it at all. And so I decided this month to, I'm going to take another swing at it. I'm older. I'm wiser. It's probably a much easier read now. And it's not. It was not an easier read. It was a very difficult read still. I found this book as difficult as reading Cormac McCarthy. Just to choose an author that I've heard other people say they also have difficulty with, where, I would read a sentence and then I would have to read it and reread it and reread it again. And even on the third rereading, it would be like I would have maybe a 40% chance of understanding what it was. No, let me give myself a little more credit. Let's say 70%. And part of this, and that does not mean that I think that this is a bad book or that I wouldn't recommend this book. Because I did find it rewarding in the end. Was it as rewarding as struggling to get through Cormac McCarthy? Probably not. But worth it in the end, I think. And I want to mention that this might also be due to a particular problem with my brain. I have great difficulty visualizing things in my brain meats. I can't picture them. I can't draw things from memory. I just don't see an image of something in my brain generally. And so if somebody this is out there. So a lot of this takes place, in cyberspace, and it just doesn't make sense to me because it's already happening in a made up world. And add to that the fact that Gibson, and I appreciate this about Gibson, this is a compliment, I swear. Gibson writes as though he is embodying this world. And that means using slang that you are not familiar with because he just made it up, but it's a part of this world. And in this world, the narrator isn't going to stop and explain all the details behind, say, like the word finna. I'm finna do this. Why did he say that? I'm not going to stop and explain it. If my if I have just said that, I'm not, the book is written from a certain perspective. That perspective does not explain events that happened in the past, the culture that he is writing within. It just is, and you just have to go with it. And I find that difficult too, because I want to make sure I'm understanding things as I read. But sometimes, not just in this book, in every well-written book, sometimes there are things you're not going to understand right away, but they'll become clear as you go. Well, sometimes that's true for Neuromancer. Sometimes you'll just never know. And so even after I got to the end of the book, I had to go and read the Wikipedia page just to make sure I didn't miss anything. And there was one minor thing that I missed, actually, that I've been meaning to go back and reread. I shouldn't do it right now on this video that I'm not planning to edit at all, because that would take effort, more effort than this. But, so yeah, there was one minor thing that I missed. But overall, I actually did get the plot. So it took a bit of a leap of faith for me. Maybe not for you. Maybe you're better at visualizing things when they're described to you. Another author who I have pretty much kind of given up on is, Neil Stephenson. Sorry, there's a chainsaw outside. Hopefully you guys can't hear that. Is it Neil Stephenson? I hope I'm not mixing him up. The guy who wrote Seven Eves. Because I was reading Seven Eves, and it's an interesting story. Yeah, Neil Stephenson. It's an interesting story, but he goes so in depth on describing exactly what a space station looks like. Like there is a knob over here, and there's I can't even make up what it is. But he's very interested in describing the physical space where characters are, and it's in one lobe of my brain and out the other. I don't find it interesting, and I can't visualize it. I say I gave up on him after Seven Eves. I didn't. I read Snow Crash late last year, and I liked it more than Seven Eves. It had less of that very specific describing everything in a physical space. I'm getting off track. William Gibson. So there's a bit of that where he'll describe this like cyberspace, and I have nothing to hold on to. And to make matters worse, and I think this was the same back in 2001 when I read it, I already had a vision of cyberspace. It looked to me like a DOS screen. So that's not true. Windows 95 had already come out 6 years prior. But it was... or Windows 3, even longer. I don't know. I guess when I think of early days cyberspace, it always, in my head, just looks like a DOS screen. But, so I found that really difficult. But I enjoyed it. It was a good story. There were parts of it that flowed better for me when characters are talking to each other, when there's character development. He spends a lot more time on the surrounding milieu, which I can understand why. Like, it was a groundbreaking book. Although I did read, when I was double checking the plot on Wikipedia, apparently this came out, he was writing this when Blade Runner came out, and he was like, well, shit, there goes my whole thing. So it's interesting that those things happened at around the same time. So I think that they were kind of equally maybe impactful on our idea of cyberpunk and dystopian futures. So, but it makes sense that he put a lot of effort into the world building and less effort into character building and character interactions that I would find most interesting. So was it my favorite book I've read in the last few months? No, but I did enjoy it. It was a struggle, but it was worth the struggle. And so, I guess I'm not going to get into spoilers. I don't think there really are. There's no big twist. There's no... the one thing that I missed at the very end doesn't need going into. It was just me maybe not reading carefully enough, but it was a minor detail. Overall, I'd recommend it if you haven't read it and you're interested in cyberpunk, The Matrix. If you want to know where The Matrix got most of their ideas, it's an interesting read, and worth it if you're into cyberpunk and you haven't read it yet. But you probably have. I'm probably the last person on the planet to finally finish this book. I wanted to choose a completely different book for my next book, but I wasn't able to get to the bookstore. I usually just go to the used bookstore and poke around until I see something interesting. But in this case, I didn't have time to get out there, so I shopped my spouse's bookshelves, which are mostly things like this, lots of science fiction. He told me, I was telling him how I felt about Neuromancer, and he said I might be interested in this other series of William Gibson's, the Bridge series, where people are living on the Bay Bridge. And I'm like, that is a concrete idea that I can already picture in my head. So, all right, let me give that a shot. So I'm currently reading Virtual Light, which is the first book in the Bridge series, and I'm really enjoying it. Like, I'm going through it a lot faster than I went through Neuromancer. I'm not a speed reader in general, and I just read a few chapters a day or so. But it is much easier for me to understand. There's a lot more character development, and it takes place in a world that I am more familiar with, so it's a little easier for me to wrap my head around. So I'm not finished that. I can give you a full review of that when I'm done. There's a few others that I read this year so far. I read The Old Man and the Sea, very short little book that I found at the used bookstore, and I was like, oh, I never read this. I've never read any Hemingway. So if you're interested, I could talk about that next. I might be done virtual light by next week, though, so I might also do that. Anyway, have you read William Gibson? Do you have trouble picturing things in your brain? Let me know in the comments. Please, put a big spoiler tag. Since I didn't do any spoilers in this video, put your own spoiler alert in your comment if you're going to talk about plot details. Just have some respect. I was trying to think of a chiller way to say that. think of your fellow book nerd who might not have read it. But I'd be interested in hearing what you guys think, especially because I know I have a very nerdy, very sci-fi friendly audience. So I'd be interested if any of you also had trouble with this book or if it's just me. So that's it. Till next time. Bye.